The smoke hung thick over the Tennessee hills that April morning in 1862. 12-year-old Benjamin Cartwright stood among the dead at Shiloh, his drum silent at his side, searching through faces that would never wake. The battlefield stretched before him like a painting rendered in shades of gray and crimson. Somewhere in this hell lay his brother Robert. He found him near a shattered oak tree. Robert Cartwright, 20 years old cavalry soldier, dying with his eyes open to the morning sky. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and spreading. Ben dropped to his knees in the mud. "Robert, I'm here. I'm here." His brother's hand found his grip weakening with each passing second. Robert's voice came in broken whispers. "Ben, listen to me. What we did here, what I did, burning homes, hurting civilians, that wasn't war. That was sin. You're going to be fine. The surgeon is coming." "No." Robert's fingers tightened one last time. "Take this." He pressed something into Ben's palm. A brass compass, old and worn, their father's compass. The metal was still warm from Robert's pocket. "Build something, Ben. Build, don't destroy. Promise me. Promise you'll be better than what I became." "I promise." Robert's eyes fixed on something beyond the smoke, beyond the sky. His hand went slack. Ben held his brother as the battle raged around them, as men screamed and cannons thundered, as the world burned and bled and died. He clutched the compass until its edges cut into his palm. The boy made a vow that day. He would build. He would create. He would find a way to redeem the violence he had witnessed, the death he had drummed men toward. One day, somehow, he would make his brother's death mean something. 21 years later, Benjamin Cartwright still carried that compass every day. The sun rose over Coyote Ridge, Wyoming territory in June of 1883, painting the eastern sky in copper and gold. Ben stood on the hill above his ranch, 160 acres earned through the Homestead Act, 5 years of backbreaking work, in the kind of solitude that either breaks a man or rebuilds him. In his hand, he held Robert's compass, the brass smooth from decades of handling. "Can you see this, brother?" he whispered to the wind. "Can you see what I'm trying to build?" The ranch spread below him, a house he had raised with his own hands, each log cut and shaped and fitted with the precision of a man who understood that details mattered. A barn that stood square and true because he had measured 3 times before cutting once. Fences that ran straight as survey lines across the prairie grass. Everything built with care. Everything honest. He was 33 years old. He had left the war behind, left the name Benjamin Hayes behind, started fresh as Benjamin Cartwright, in a place where no one knew what he had seen or failed to prevent. The surveying tools in his barn were immaculate. The horses in his corral were well trained. The land produced. But the loneliness still sat heavy in his chest like a stone. Ben turned the compass in his fingers, watching sunlight catch on its face. The needle pointed true north, unwavering. He wished his own path felt as certain. A voice called from below. "Mr. Cartwright." Tommy Wade scrambled up the hill, 16 years old and eager, carrying a canvas bag of surveying equipment. The boy had appeared 3 weeks ago asking to apprentice, and Ben had surprised himself by saying yes. There was something in Tommy's eyes, a hunger to learn, to be something more than what his father expected. "Morning, Tommy." "Morning, sir. I brought the stakes and the measuring chain like you said." Ben studied the boy. Earnest face, calloused hands already from farm work, a careful way of handling the tools that showed respect. He didn't know yet that Tommy's father was Sheriff Clayton Wade. When he learned that particular truth, it would complicate everything. But for now, there was just a young man who wanted to understand how to measure the world accurately. "Good. We're going to run a boundary line today. But first, let me ask you something. Why do you want to learn surveying?" Tommy shifted his weight, considering the question seriously. "Because surveying is about truth, isn't it? About knowing exactly where things are. My pa always says surveyors are liars, but I don't think that's right. I think maybe he just met the wrong ones." Ben felt something shift in his chest. This boy understood. "Your pa is half right. There are surveyors who will adjust their measurements for money. But surveying itself, surveying is about precision, about making sure every man gets exactly what he's owed, no more, no less. 1 inch wrong on paper can mean acres of dispute in reality." "That's what I thought." Tommy's face brightened. "Will you teach me that the honest way?" "I will, but you have to promise me something. No matter who asks, no matter what they offer you, you never falsify a measurement. Not once. Not ever. A man's word is only as good as his work, and a surveyor's work speaks for him long after he's gone. I promise, Mr. Cartwright. Ben held out the compass. This belonged to my brother. He died at Shiloh when I was your age. He told me to build something good. Every time I use this compass, I remember that. Truth matters, Tommy. It's the foundation everything else stands on. The boy took the compass with reverence, understanding he held something sacred. I won't let you down, sir. I know you won't. They worked through the morning, Ben teaching the principles of triangulation, showing how 3 points could map an entire territory. Tommy learned quickly his measurements, careful his notes precise. Ben found himself thinking that maybe this was part of Robert's legacy too, teaching the next generation to value accuracy over profit, honesty over convenience. As the sun climbed toward noon, Ben sent Tommy home with homework, calculate the acreage of his family's property using the measurements they had taken. The boy rode off with the surveying manual tucked carefully in his bag. Ben returned to the house, meaning to check the fence line along the western pasture. But as he gathered his tools, he heard it, a gunshot, sharp and deliberate, echoing across town. Not the crack of a rifle, but the report of a pistol fired into the air. A warning shot. He knew that sound. Sheriff Wade liked to announce his authority that way. Someone had arrived in Coyote Ridge, and Wade wanted them to know who held power here. Ben's instincts, honed by years of cavalry service, told him to investigate. He saddled his horse and rode toward town, the compass heavy in his pocket, Robert's voice echoing in his memory. Build something good. Protect those who need protecting. He had no idea that everything was about to change. Main Street in Coyote Ridge stretched like a scar through the Wyoming dust. The stagecoach sat in front of the general store horses, breathing hard from the journey. A crowd had gathered, faces turned toward a single figure stepping down from the coach. Ben reined in his horse near the blacksmith, staying in the back but watching. The woman wore black, a widow's mourning dress, dusty from travel. She carried one small carpet bag, holding it close like it contained everything she owned. Her face was set with determination, but Ben could see the exhaustion around her eyes, the way her shoulders carried weight beyond the physical. She was maybe 28, auburn hair, pinned beneath a simple hat, hands ungloved and work-worn. She stood alone on the street as the crowd stared, as curtains twitched in windows, as whispers spread like fire through dry grass. Sheriff Clayton Wade stepped from the shadows of the bank, hand resting on his gun belt. 46-years-old gray threading through his dark hair, a man who had been handsome once before bitterness carved lines around his mouth. He looked at the woman the way a hawk looks at a wounded rabbit. Welcome to Coyote Ridge, ma'am. Wade's voice carried false courtesy. Bit unusual, a woman traveling alone. I'm looking for the boarding house. Her voice was steady, controlled. I need a room. Boarding house is that way, but you might want to try the Grand Hotel first. More suitable for a lady. Ben watched the exchange, his surveyor's mind noting details. The way Wade positioned himself to block her path. The way his deputies had materialized on either side of the street. The way the crowd had formed a loose circle, trapping her in the center of their attention. This was orchestrated. The woman walked to the Grand Hotel. Ben followed at a distance, staying mounted, observing. He watched her enter. Watched the desk clerk's face close the moment she approached. Watched her emerge minutes later, rejected. She tried Morrison's boarding house next. Same result. The Territorial Inn. Doors closed in her face at each stop. By the time she reached the edge of town, desperation had begun to show in the set of her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands as she gripped her bag. The sun was sinking low, painting everything in harsh orange light. She had nowhere to go. The Dusty Spur sat at the rough end of Main Street, a saloon that made no pretense of respectability. Swinging doors, the smell of whiskey and tobacco, the sound of rough laughter spilling into the street. Not a place for a woman alone. But she walked toward it anyway because there was nowhere else left. Ben dismounted, tying his horse to the rail. Something in him recognized the set of her shoulders. He had seen it in soldiers who refused to break under fire, who would walk toward the cannons because retreat meant something worse than death. This woman was fighting a war. He just didn't know what war yet. He followed her inside. The Dusty Spur fell silent as she entered. Card games stopped mid-deal. Painted women froze with glasses halfway to lips. Men turned to stare, some with curiosity, some with crueler intent. The bartender, Henry Porter, wiped his hands on his apron, looking uncomfortable. Ma'am, this ain't really a place for... I need a room. She walked to the bar, ignoring the eyes on her. Just for tonight. I've tried everywhere else. Henry glanced toward the door where Wade's shadow had appeared, then back to her. I got one room, but there's problems. What problems? It's already paid for. Fella comes through once a month, keeps it reserved. He ain't due back till tomorrow. I can leave before he returns. Henry hesitated, looking genuinely apologetic. There's another problem, ma'am. That room's only got one bed. The entire saloon waited. This was the moment when a respectable woman would leave, when shame would drive her back into the street. Ben watched her face, saw the calculation behind her eyes, saw her measuring her options and finding them all wanting. She lifted her chin, her voice rang clear. That's perfect. Gasps, whistles, laughter erupted around the room. Men slapped tables, made crude comments that Ben's military discipline barely kept him from answering with violence. But she didn't flinch. She paid Henry Porter $2, took the key, and walked toward the stairs with her head high. Ben understood then. She wasn't shameless, she was cornered, and she refused to show fear. As she climbed the stairs, her eyes met his across the crowded room. For one moment, they looked at each other and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement of two people who had both learned to stand when the world tried to break them. Then she was gone, disappearing into the upstairs hallway. The saloon slowly returned to its drinking and gambling, though the talk was all about her now. The widow who took a room with one bed, the woman with no shame, the stranger who thought she could defy the rules. Ben sat in the corner nursing whiskey he had no intention of drinking, listening, and that was when he learned her name. Mrs. Hayes, they said. One of the card players spoke too loud, drunk already. Widow of that engineer Daniel Hayes, the one who died at Silver Creek. Silver Creek? Another player spat tobacco juice into a spittoon. That mine collapse Morrison blamed on bad luck. Heard Hayes found something he wasn't supposed to find. Well, he ain't finding nothing now, is he? Ben's hand tightened on his glass. Silver Creek. He knew that mine. He had surveyed it back in 1881 working for Victor Morrison, before he understood what kind of man Morrison was. Before he learned that Morrison wanted him to sign off on structural reports that weren't accurate, to certify supports that wouldn't hold, to put his name on lies. Ben had refused. Morrison had threatened him. Ben had left, changed his name from Hayes to Cartwright, started over in a place where Morrison's influence hadn't yet spread. But if this woman's husband had died at Silver Creek, if Daniel Hayes had been killed in a collapse that could have been prevented, then Morrison's corruption had claimed another victim. And if she was asking questions, if she had come to Coyote Ridge looking for answers, then she was in more danger than she knew. Ben stood paid for his untouched whiskey and walked to the stairs. He needed to make sure she understood what she had walked into. He needed to warn her. He needed to help her because Robert's voice in his head said that building something good sometimes meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The floorboard outside her door creaked under his boot. Inside the room, he heard movement stop. Who's there? Her voice came through the door, sharp with alertness. Name's Benjamin Cartwright, ma'am. That room you're in belongs to me. Silence, then the door opened a crack held by a chain. One green eye studied him through the gap. You didn't laugh. Her first words surprised him. Ma'am. When Mr. Porter said there was only one bed, everyone else laughed. You didn't. Ben met her eye steadily. Nothing funny about needing shelter. The eye searched his face, measuring, judging. He stood still, letting her assess him. Finally, she spoke again. What do you want, Mr. Cartwright? To tell you that you can keep the room tonight. I'll sleep in the stable. But I also need to tell you that Sheriff Wade has deputies watching this building. They're waiting outside right now. Fear flickered across her visible eye, quickly suppressed. Why are you telling me this? Because I heard your name is Hayes, and I heard your husband died at Silver Creek, and I know that, ma'am. I know what happened. There wasn't an accident. Her breath caught. You know, I know enough, and I know that asking questions about it in this town is dangerous. Wade works for Morrison. Morrison doesn't like questions. The door closed. For a moment, Ben thought that was the end of it. Then the chain rattled and the door opened wider. Margaret Hayes stood there, no longer hiding behind the gap, studying him with an intensity that reminded him of officers assessing battlefield intelligence. Why would you help me, Mr. Cartwright? You don't know me. I know Wade, that's enough. And I know what it's like to see injustice and do nothing about it. I spent too many years watching bad things happen and telling myself it wasn't my business. I'm done with that. She nodded slowly. The stable. That's where you'll be. All night, if you need help, you call my name. I'll hear you. Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. Ben, just Ben. Margaret, I prefer Maggie. He touched the brim of his hat. Get some rest, Maggie. Tomorrow we figure out how to keep you alive. The stable behind the dusty spur smelled of hay and horse familiar scents that reminded Ben of cavalry camps in simpler times. He spread his bedroll in an empty stall, his rifle within easy reach, and tried to sleep. But rest wouldn't come. His mind kept circling back to Maggie Hayes, to the set of her jaw when she said, "That's perfect," to the fear she hid so well, to the fact that she had come to Coyote Ridge alone, knowing it was dangerous because something drove her harder than common sense. Ben knew that drive. He had felt it at Shiloh searching for Robert in the carnage. He had felt it building this ranch, proving to himself that he could create instead of destroy. It was the drive that came when you had already lost everything that mattered, when fear became irrelevant because the worst had already happened. Maggie Hayes was hunting the truth about her husband's death, and truth was the one thing Victor Morrison couldn't afford. Around midnight, Ben heard voices outside. He rose silently, moving to the stable door. Two of Wade's deputies stood in the alley speaking low. Wade say what he wants with her. The first deputy, a lean man with a knife scar on his cheek, says to watch her close, says she's connected to the Silver Creek business. The second deputy, younger, nervous. Hayes was her husband, right? The engineer who died in the collapse. That's what Wade says Morrison wants her gone before she starts asking questions. If she don't leave on her own, we're supposed to make sure she has an accident. Like Hayes did, exactly like Hayes did. Ben's hand found his rifle stock. These men were casually discussing murder, planning it, and they worked for the law in this town. The deputies moved on, continuing their patrol. Ben stood in the darkness, rage and resolve warring in his chest. He had known Wade was corrupt. He hadn't realized how deep the rot went. Maggie Hayes was marked for death. Morrison had killed her husband for discovering the truth about Silver Creek. Now Morrison would kill her too, unless someone stood between her and that fate. Ben looked up at the window of her room, saw lamplight still burning. She couldn't sleep either. She knew she was in danger, must have known it before she ever arrived. But she had come anyway. Robert, Ben whispered to the darkness, to his brother's memory. You told me to build. But sometimes building means clearing away what's rotten first. Sometimes it means standing your ground. He settled back into the hay rifle across his lap and kept watch through the night. Sleep could wait. Right now someone needed protecting, and Ben Cartwright had made too many promises to dead men to break another one. Morning came cold and clear. Ben washed at the stable pump, changed into a clean shirt he kept in his saddlebags, and walked to the front of the dusty spur. Maggie emerged as the sun touched the upper windows, her dress dusty but her spine straight. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. The moment she stepped onto Main Street, the watching began. Women pulled their children to the other side of the road. Men leaned against posts and whispered, smirking. The whole town had heard about the widow who took the room with one bed, and they had judged her guilty of every sin their small minds could imagine. Ben saw her flinch just once, so quick most people would have missed it. Then she squared her shoulders and walked toward the post office like she owned the street. He followed at a distance, close enough to help if needed, far enough not to add to her troubles. But he needn't have worried about discretion. Sheriff Wade had other plans. Wade stepped from the shadows beside the bank, materializing like a bad omen. His hand rested casually on his gun belt, but there was nothing casual about the way he positioned himself in Maggie's path. Mrs. Hayes, Wade's voice carried across the morning quiet. I hear you caused quite a stir last night. Maggie stopped, meeting his eyes. Ben moved closer, staying out of sight but within earshot. I needed a room, Sheriff. The dusty spur was the only place that had one. Is that so? Wade circled her slowly, a predator enjoying the hunt. Funny thing, I happen to know the Territorial Inn had 2 empty rooms last night. Morrison's boarding house had space too, but somehow you ended up at the saloon. In a room with 1 bed, a room that just happened to belong to Benjamin Cartwright. So Wade knew about that already. Information traveled fast when you controlled it. I was turned away from those other places, Maggie said carefully. Were you now? Well, Mrs. Hayes' Coyote Ridge is a respectable town. We have standards. A widow like you should find proper lodgings, proper company, the kind of company that doesn't include drifters and questionable establishments. And if I don't meet your standards, Sheriff, Wade stepped closer, lowering his voice. But Ben heard every word. Then accidents happen. Women with no family, no protection. They disappear out here. The frontier can be very dangerous for someone all alone. Bomb. It was a threat, clear and direct. Ben's hand moved toward his gun before he caught himself. Not yet. Not in the open where Wade had all the advantages. I appreciate the warning, Sheriff. Maggie's voice stayed level, but Ben could see her hands trembling. Wade smiled thin and cold. One more thing, Mrs. Hayes. You look familiar. Have we met before? I don't believe so. Strange, you remind me of someone. Can't quite place it, but it'll come to me. He tipped his hat mockingly. You have a nice day now, and think about what I said. This town has ways of dealing with troublemakers. He walked away, leaving Maggie alone on the street. Ben saw her knees lock, saw her fighting to stay upright. She was terrified, and she had every right to be. Ben waited until Wade disappeared into his office. Then he stepped from the alley, walking toward Maggie with purpose. She saw him coming tensed, as if expecting another confrontation. Mr. Cartwright, I heard what he said to you. Ben kept his voice low. Wade's not making idle threats. You need to leave Coyote Ridge. Today. I can't. Can't or won't. Both. She looked at him with eyes that held too much pain. My husband is dead because of what happens in this town. I came here to find proof. I'm not leaving without it. Ben studied her face, saw the steel beneath the fear. Then you need help, and you need a safe place to stay. That saloon room won't protect you. I have nowhere else. The words came before he fully thought them through. You can work at my ranch. I need a housekeeper. Room board wages. You'd have your own space. You'd be safe. Why would you do that? Because everyone else turned their back on you. And because I spent too many years watching good people get hurt while I did nothing. I won't do that again. Maggie searched his face, looking for the lie, the trap, the ulterior motive. Ben let her look. He had nothing to hide. When would I start? She finally asked. Right now. Get your bag. We're leaving before Wade decides to push this further. They walked back to the dusty spur together, collected her carpet bag, and headed for Ben's wagon. People stared. Curtains twitched. Ben knew the talk would start immediately. Cartwright and the widow. But let them talk. Words were just noise. As they climbed onto the wagon, Wade appeared on the street watching. He touched his hat in a mocking salute. Remember what I said, Mrs. Hayes? I'm watching. Ben snapped the reins, and the wagon rolled forward. Maggie sat beside him, straight-backed and silent. Neither of them spoke until they had cleared the edge of town. That was foolish of you, Maggie said finally, taking me in. Wade will make you a target now, too. Wade already made me a target when I refused to falsify surveys for Morrison 2 years ago. I've been waiting for him to make a move ever since. You worked for Morrison. Briefly, until I understood what he wanted from me. Some surveyors will adjust their numbers for money. I'm not one of them. Maggie turned to look at him fully. My husband was an engineer, an honest one. He wouldn't sign off on structures he knew were unsafe. That's why they killed him. I know. How then? Because Morrison tried the same thing with me. Wanted me to certify supports at Silver Creek that weren't properly installed. Wanted my signature on documents that would clear him of liability if anything went wrong. When I refused, he blacklisted me. I had to change my name, move here, start over. Your name wasn't always Cartwright. It was Hayes, Benjamin Hayes. I changed it to Cartwright after I left Morrison's employ. Easier to start fresh with a clean name. Maggie went very still. Hayes. Daniel's last name was Hayes. Common enough name. Not that common. Were you related? Not that I know of, but I feel like I owe him something. We were both honest men in a dishonest business. He paid with his life. I just paid with my reputation. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking over the rough road, the prairie grass rippling in the wind. Ben pointed out landmarks, teaching without thinking about it. See how the horizon curves there? That's a sign of underground water. And those cottonwood trees, their roots always follow the water table. A good surveyor learns to read the land before he ever sets up his equipment. You love it? The work. I love the honesty of it. Numbers don't lie. Measurements don't change based on who's paying. The earth is what it is. That's comforting after spending years in a war where truth was the first casualty. You were in the war. It wasn't a question. Ben nodded. Shiloh, I was 12, a drummer boy. Watched my brother die there. He was cavalry, 20 years old, good man who did bad things under bad orders. His last words to me were to build something good, to make up for what he'd seen, what he'd done. I'm sorry. Long time ago, but I still carry his compass. Still try to honor what he asked. The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill. Maggie saw it spread before her, modest but well-maintained. The house sat square and solid, the barn painted and straight, fences running true as ruler lines across the property. You built all this with my own hands. Every board measured 3 times, every post set true. It's not much, but it's honest work. It's perfect, Maggie said softly. Ben showed her the house, a small bedroom with the iron bed and handmade quilt. This is yours. Door has a lock. Window faces east, so you'll get morning sun. I sleep in the main room on a cot. Spent enough years sleeping on the ground that a cot feels like luxury. Maggie set her bag on the bed, running her hand over the quilt. Who made this? My mother before she died. One of the few things I kept when I left Tennessee. It's beautiful. She would have liked you. She had no patience for lies or people who traded truth for profit. They spent the afternoon in careful politeness, Ben showing her where things were kept, Maggie cooking a simple dinner that Ben ate like it was the finest meal he had tasted. After they cleaned up, they sat at the rough table, and the pretense finally fell away. Why did you really come to Coyote Ridge? Ben asked. The truth this time. Maggie hesitated, then reached into her bodice and pulled out a folded piece of paper stained and worn. Daniel wrote this moments before the collapse. Someone found it in his pocket after they pulled his body out. The company gave it to me with his effects. She unfolded it carefully. Ben saw the shaky handwriting words written in desperate haste. Eleanor, don't trust Caldwell. The maps are wrong. The supports have been sabotaged. This isn't an accident. They're going to. The sentence ended there, cut off by death. Eleanor, Ben asked gently. My real name. I go by my middle name, Margaret. Maggie. Easier that way. And Caldwell. William Caldwell was Morrison's partner in the mining operation. But I've searched every record I could find. There is no William Caldwell. It's an alias. I think Caldwell and Morrison are the same person. Ben's mind raced. If Morrison falsified his own identity, if he's operating under multiple names, then the corruption goes deeper than land fraud. He's hiding something massive. My husband discovered it. That's why he died. And you came here to finish what he started. I came here to make sure his death meant something. Judge Ernest Foster is due in Coyote Ridge in 28 days. If I can gather enough evidence, if I can prove Morrison's fraud, then Daniel's murder won't be in vain. Ben stood pacing. 28 days. Wade knows you're here. Morrison probably knows by now, too. They'll move against you. I know. Then we need to move faster. We need proof so solid that even Morrison's lawyers can't fight it. Ben turned to face her. Turned to. You thought I was going to let you do this alone. It's not your fight. It became my fight the moment Morrison tried to corrupt me. It became my fight when your husband died defending the truth. And it became my fight when Wade threatened you this morning. He pulled out a chair, sat back down. Besides, I have something you need. What? Knowledge. I surveyed half this territory. I know every piece of land Morrison owns, every property he's acquired through questionable means. I know how he operates, and I have contacts, people who owe me favors, people who might talk if the right person asks. Maggie's eyes shone with tears she refused to shed. Why are you doing this? Because my brother told me to build something good. And sometimes building means tearing down what's rotten first. Sometimes it means standing up when everyone else is sitting down. Sometimes it means helping a widow who had the courage to walk into a saloon and say, that's perfect, when the whole world expected her to run. She laughed, then surprised into it. You heard that. Everyone heard that. It was the bravest thing I've seen since the war. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they were undertaking settling between them. Finally, Maggie spoke. I need to show you something. She went to her room, returned with her carpet bag. From the bottom beneath her few clothes, she pulled out a leather portfolio. Daniel's work notes, survey maps, correspondence, everything he had that the company didn't confiscate. Ben spread the papers across the table, his surveyor's eye immediately catching discrepancies. These numbers are wrong. Look here, this structural calculation. The load-bearing capacity is overstated by at least 40%. Daniel marked it. See the notation in the margin. Ben read the cramped handwriting. Supports installed incorrectly. Flag for Morrison. Ignored. 3 weeks before the collapse. Ben continued examining documents. Then he stopped, his hand freezing over a piece of paper. Maggie, look at this. It was a survey certification for the Silver Creek mine dated March 1881. At the bottom, a signature. Benjamin Hayes. That's my signature, Ben said slowly. But I never signed this document. I never certified those supports. I refused. Are you sure? I'm positive. I remember this survey. Morrison wanted me to sign off without completing the full structural analysis. I told him I needed 2 more weeks to properly assess the underground supports. He said he didn't have 2 weeks. I said I didn't have a signature to give him. We argued. I quit the next day. But your signature is right there. It's forged. A good forgery, but forged. Look at the date. March 15th, 1881. I was already gone by then. This signature is dated 2 weeks after I left Morrison's employ. When they looked at each other, the implications sinking in. He's been using your name, Maggie whispered. All this time he's been using your signature to certify fraudulent surveys. Which means I'm complicit. On paper, I'm as guilty as he is. If this goes to trial, Morrison's lawyers will claim I'm the one who falsified everything, that I'm lying now to save myself. Unless we can prove the forgery. Unless we can prove the forgery, Ben agreed. And to do that, we need the original documents, the ones Morrison keeps locked away. Where would he keep them? His office at the main mining operation. He has a safe there. I've seen it. Maggie's expression hardened with determination. Then we need to get into that safe. That's breaking and entering. That's theft. That could get us arrested or killed. My husband is dead. Your name is being used to commit fraud. How much worse can it get? Ben looked at the forged signature, at the documents spread across his table, at the woman sitting across from him with fire in her eyes and steel in her spine. He thought about Robert dying in the mud at Shiloh, about the promise he made about building something good in a world that seemed determined to burn. We're going to need help, he said finally. I can't do this alone, and neither can you. We need allies. Who? I don't know yet, but we have 28 days to find them. 28 days to gather evidence. 28 days to build a case so solid that Morrison and Wade can't fight their way out. And if we fail, then we fail honestly, which is more than Morrison can say. They worked late into the night cataloging documents, comparing notes, building a timeline of Morrison's fraud. Ben sketched maps from memory showing properties Morrison had acquired through forced sales and intimidation. Maggie cross-referenced them with Daniel's notes, finding patterns. Around midnight, she finally looked up, exhausted. I should sleep. Tomorrow we start asking questions. Carefully, Ben warned. Wade will be watching. Morrison will have people reporting back. We have to be smart about this. I know. She stood to go to her room, then paused at the door. Ben, Schwoen. Yeah, thank you for everything, for the room, for believing me, for helping. I know what you're risking. We're risking it together now. She smiled, tired but genuine, and disappeared into her room. Ben heard the lock click, heard her moving around, heard the bed creak as she finally lay down. He sat alone at the table, looking at the forged signature with his name on it, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. But he also thought about Maggie's courage, about the way she had walked into that saloon and refused to be ashamed, about the fire in her eyes when she talked about justice for her husband. Robert's compass sat on the table beside the papers. Ben picked it up, watched the needle settle north. I'm building something, brother, he said to the empty room. I'm building a case. I'm building an alliance. I'm building something that matters. I hope you can see it. I hope you know I'm trying. The compass needle didn't move, but Ben felt something settle in his chest, a rightness he hadn't felt in years. This was what Robert had meant. Not just physical structures, but something more. Justice, truth, protection for those who needed it. Tomorrow they would start the real work. Tomorrow they would begin gathering the evidence that might save them or condemn them. Tomorrow the war would truly begin. But tonight, Ben Cartwright sat in his honest house on his honest land and felt for the first time since Shiloh like he was doing exactly what he was meant to do. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched vast and star-filled. Somewhere in town, Wade was planning his next move. Somewhere in his office, Morrison was protecting his secrets. And somewhere, justice waited patient and implacable for men brave enough to call it forth. Ben went to his cot, lay down with his rifle beside him, and slept better than he had in months. The game had begun. Dawn broke over the Cartwright Ranch with the kind of crystalline clarity that made distances deceptive. Ben stood at the fence line, watching Tommy Wade ride up the long approach, the boy's posture, speaking of something troubling, even from half a mile away. 25 days remained until Judge Ernest Foster's arrival. 25 days to build a case that could stand against Victor Morrison's lawyers and Clayton Wade's corruption. Not much time. And from the look on Tommy's face, time was about to get shorter. The boy dismounted near the barn, tying his horse with the careful knots Ben had taught him. At 16, Tommy moved with the awkward grace of someone still growing into his height, but his hands were steady. 3 weeks of surveying lessons had taught him precision. "Mr. Cartwright," Tommy's voice carried strain. "We need to talk. Come inside, Maggie's making coffee." They walked to the house together, Ben noting the way Tommy kept glancing over his shoulder, the nervous energy that vibrated through him. Something had happened. Maggie looked up from the stove as they entered, her eyes immediately assessing Tommy's distress. She had been living at the ranch for 3 days now, and already the place felt different. More alive, the morning meals were better. The house smelled of bread and coffee instead of just dust and loneliness. But more than that, having someone to talk to, someone who understood the stakes, made the burden feel less crushing. "Tommy," Maggie poured coffee into 3 tin cups. "You look worried." "I am, ma'am." The boy accepted the coffee but didn't drink. "I heard my father talking last night to Morrison. They were in the sheriff's office, thought I was asleep in the back room, but I listened." Ben and Maggie exchanged glances. "What did you hear?" "They're planning something. Morrison said the circuit judge is coming in less than a month, said they need to clean up any loose ends before then." My father asked if that meant Mrs. Hayes. Morrison said it meant anyone asking questions. "Did they mention names?" Ben kept his voice calm, though his hand tightened on his cup. "Martha Dawson, Frank Miller, someone named Rose, and you two." Tommy finally met their eyes. "Morrison said you are both problems that need solving." "My father said he'd handle it." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Ben had known this was coming, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way speculation hadn't. "Tommy," Ben set down his cup, "this puts you in a difficult position. Wade is your father." "He's not the father I thought I had." Bitterness crept into the boy's voice. "When I was little, people respected him. He wore that badge with honor. But somewhere along the way he changed. Or maybe I just started seeing him clearly. Either way, telling us this is dangerous for you." "I know. But Mr. Cartwright, you taught me that surveying is about truth. About making sure every measurement is exact because people's lives depend on those numbers being right. Well, this is the same thing. If I stay quiet, people die. If I help you, maybe they don't." Maggie reached across the table, squeezed the boy's hand. "You're braver than you know." "I'm scared," Tommy admitted, "but I'm more scared of becoming like my father. Of looking back in 20 years and realizing I had a chance to do the right thing and didn't take it." Ben walked to the window, looked out at the land he had built with his own hands. Robert's compass sat on the sill, catching morning light. His brother had faced a similar choice that Shiloh had chosen wrong and spent his dying moments regretting it. Now this boy, barely more than a child, was choosing differently. "All right," Ben turned back to face them. "Then we use the time we have. We gather evidence, we find allies, and we build a case so strong that Morrison and Wade can't fight their way out. But we do it carefully. No unnecessary risks, no heroics, just methodical, honest work." "Where do we start?" Maggie asked. "With the victims, the people Wade and Morrison have already hurt. If we can get them to testify, if we can document the pattern of intimidation and fraud, then we have the foundation of a case." Tommy pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I made a list. Everyone I've heard my father mention. Everyone Morrison's bought land from or threatened. Ben unfolded the paper, read the names. 12 families, 12 stories of loss and intimidation. A pattern so clear that even Morrison's lawyers would struggle to dismiss it. Good work. Ben looked at the boy with something like pride. Now comes the hard part, convincing these people to talk. The Dawson farm sat 3 miles west of Coyote Ridge, a modest spread of 40 acres that had been in the family for 2 generations. Ben and Maggie rode out late morning, leaving Tommy at the ranch with instructions to continue his surveying practice and watch for any suspicious visitors. Martha Dawson met them at the door, a woman in her early 40s with work-hardened hands and suspicious eyes. She held a shotgun loosely, not quite pointed at them, but not exactly welcoming either. "Mrs. Dawson." Ben removed his hat. "I'm Benjamin Cartwright. This is Margaret Hayes. We'd like to talk to you about your well." "Don't know what you're talking about." Martha's finger rested near the trigger guard. "And I don't appreciate strangers riding onto my property uninvited." "We're not here to cause trouble," Maggie said gently. "My husband died at Silver Creek Mine. I think the same people who killed him are the ones who poisoned your water." Something shifted in Martha's expression. Fear, maybe, or recognition. "You're the widow, the one staying at the Dusty Spur." "I was. I'm working for Mr. Cartwright now." "And you?" Martha turned her attention to Ben. "You're the surveyor who wouldn't sign Morrison's papers." "That's right. So you're both on Morrison's bad side. That makes you either very brave or very stupid." "Maybe both," Ben admitted. "But we're trying to build a case against Morrison and Sheriff Wade. We need witnesses, people willing to tell what was done to them." "Tell who Wade is the law here. Judge Ernest Foster is coming in 24 days. He's honest. If we can present him with enough evidence, he can issue warrants, start a real investigation." Martha lowered the shotgun slightly. "And if Foster doesn't believe you, if Morrison's lawyers tear your case apart, then what happens to the people who testified?" "Then we all go down together," Maggie said. "But at least we'll have tried. At least we won't have let them win without a fight." Martha studied them for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come inside. I'll show you what they did." The farmhouse was clean but sparse, the kind of place where every object served a purpose and nothing was wasted. Martha led them through to the kitchen, poured water from a pitcher into 3 glasses. "Taste it," she said. Ben sipped. The water was clean, pure. "This is good water. It's from the creek 2 miles east. We haul it every day because our well is poisoned. Has been for 6 months." She took them outside, showed them the well. Ben knelt beside it, examining the stonework, the bucket, and rope. Everything looked normal. But when he drew water and held it to the light, he could see the faint cloudiness, the chemical taint. "May I take a sample?" He pulled a small glass bottle from his saddlebag, the kind he used for soil testing. "Take whatever you want. Won't bring back the livestock we lost drinking it." Ben filled the bottle, corked it carefully. "Tell me what happened. Start from the beginning." Martha's story came out in careful, measured words, like she had told it to herself so many times that it had become a script. 6 months ago, the railroad had announced its planned route through the territory. 2 weeks after that announcement, her well water started making the animals sick. Cows died. Horses refused to drink. Her husband found empty bottles near the well bottles that smelled of chemicals. "We reported it to Sheriff Wade," Martha said. "He came out, looked around, said it was probably natural contamination. Said wells go bad sometimes. But my husband knew better. This well had been good for 20 years. Did Wade investigate? He said he would, never did. Then Morrison showed up, offered to buy our land. Said we couldn't farm without good water, might as well sell while we could. Offered $100 for 40 acres. Ben's jaw tightened. 40 acres is worth at least 5,000. We know, we refused. That night, someone set fire to our barn. We lost everything stored for winter. Wade called it an accident, said we must have had a lantern burning. We never burn lanterns in the barn, Martha said quietly. Too dangerous with all that dry hay. Maggie pulled out a notebook, writing carefully. Would you be willing to tell this to Judge Foster? If I do, Morrison will come after us again. Maybe finish what he started. If you don't, he'll keep doing this to other families. And my husband's death will mean nothing. Martha looked at Maggie, seeing the grief that still shadowed her eyes, the determination that kept her upright. Your husband, what was his name? Daniel Hayes, he was an engineer. He died because he wouldn't lie about structural safety at Silver Creek. Hayes, Martha's expression softened. I heard about that collapse. They said 14 men died. 14 men who didn't have to die. 14 families who lost husbands and fathers because Morrison cut corners and bought silence. All right, Martha's voice was barely above a whisper. I'll testify. Not for Morrison or Wade. For those 14 men. And for every other family Morrison's hurt. Ben carefully labeled the water sample, tucked it into his saddlebag alongside his surveying tools. Thank you, Mrs. Dawson. You're braver than you know. I'm not brave. I'm angry, and I'm tired of being scared. They rode from the Dawson farm with one witness secured and a water sample that could prove deliberate poisoning. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The kind of evidence that could be measured, analyzed, presented in court with scientific certainty. She's terrified, Maggie said as they rode. Did you see her hands shaking? I saw, but she'll hold. That kind of anger burns hotter than fear. I hope you're right. Their next stop was the blacksmith shop in town where Frank Miller worked metal into useful shapes and kept his own counsel about the things he had made for the wrong people. Ben had known Frank peripherally the way men in small communities know each other through occasional business and shared histories. Frank had served in the war, though, on the Union side, while Ben's Tennessee regiment had fought for the Confederacy. But veterans recognized each other, regardless of which flag they had followed, and there was a kinship in having survived that particular hell. The forge glowed orange in the dimness of the shop, heat radiating in waves. Frank looked up from the horseshoe he was shaping, eyes narrowing as he recognized his visitors. Cartwright wasn't expecting to see you here. Need to talk, Frank, about work you did for Morrison. The hammer stopped mid-swing. Frank set it down carefully, wiped his hands on his leather apron. Don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, and I think it's been eating at you. Frank glanced toward the door, checking for listeners. Then he moved to close it, sliding the bolt. When he turned back, the bluster had drained from his face, leaving only weariness. What do you want from me, Cartwright? The truth, that's all. Just the truth about what Morrison asked you to make. And if I tell you then what Wade arrests me for helping Morrison commit crimes, I go to prison while Morrison walks free. Judge Foster is coming in 3 weeks. If we can present enough evidence, Morrison goes to prison. Wade too. But we need witnesses who can testify to the pattern of corruption. Frank looked at Maggie. You're the widow, Hayes' wife. I am. Your husband was a good man. Came to my shop once, asked me to make some specialized drilling equipment. Paid fair, treated me with respect. I heard what happened to him. I'm sorry. Did you make equipment for Morrison too? Maggie's voice stayed gentle, non-accusatory. Frank's shoulders sagged. I did. Drills designed for weakening mine supports without leaving obvious damage. Poison injectors disguised as livestock medicine applicators. Tools made specifically for causing problems while maintaining deniability. Why, Ben asked, you're not a man who takes pride in dishonest work. Because Morrison paid triple what the work was worth. Because I had debts after the war, medical bills for injuries that never quite healed right. Because I was desperate and stupid and told myself it wasn't my business what people did with the things I made. But it bothered you. It's eaten at me every day since. I'm a craftsman, Cartwright. I take pride in my work. And I use that skill to help men commit evil. That's a hard thing to live with. Maggie stepped forward. Then help us stop him. Help us make sure no one else gets hurt the way my husband did. I marked every piece I made for Morrison, Frank said quietly. Put a small stamp on each one, a maker's mark. If you find those tools at crime scenes, if you can prove they came from my shop, that creates a direct link between Morrison and the crime. Ben felt something click into place. Physical evidence. Traceable, provable, undeniable. Where would Wade keep confiscated items? Evidence from investigations. Sheriff's office has a storage room, but it's locked, and Wade has the only key. We'll figure that out. Can you testify about what you made and for whom? Frank looked at his hands, scarred and strong from years of working hot metal. I served at Antietam. Saw things there that still wake me up at night. Thought I'd left that kind of horror behind when I came west. But I brought it with me, didn't I? Made tools that hurt people just as sure as any bayonet or cannon. You can't change the past, Ben said. None of us can, but you can't help stop it from continuing. All right, I'll testify. Not for Morrison or Wade, for my own conscience. Been carrying this guilt too long. They left the blacksmith shop with a second witness and the knowledge that physical evidence existed linking Morrison to specific crimes. The case was taking shape piece by piece like a structure being built from solid materials. But as they walked toward their horses, a woman's voice stopped them. "Mr. Cartwright? Mrs. Hayes, a moment, please." Rose Chambers stood in the alley beside the general store, dressed in a plain gray dress that contrasted sharply with the bright colors she wore at the Dusty Spur. Without the paint and false cheerfulness, she looked older, harder, and infinitely more serious. "Miss Chambers," Ben tipped his hat, "can we help you?" "It's Rose, please. And it's I who can help you. I know what you're doing. I know you're building a case against Morrison and Wade." Maggie glanced around nervously. This isn't a safe place to discuss such things. Nowhere in this town is safe if you're speaking truth, but I have information you need. Meet me tonight, behind the church, midnight. "Why help us?" Ben asked. "What's your stake in this?" Rose's expression hardened into something that might have been carved from stone. "Because 8 years ago, Morrison and Wade destroyed my family. Because I've spent those 8 years writing down every crime I witnessed, every deal I overheard, every piece of corruption that passed through the Dusty Spur. And because I'm tired of being silent. 8 years is a long time to carry that weight. I had my reasons for waiting. But now you're here gathering witnesses, building a case. This might be my only chance to make Morrison pay for what he took from me." "What did he take?" Maggie's voice was soft, recognizing the shape of grief in Rose's eyes. "Everything. My husband, my daughter, my name, my life." Rose blinked hard, fighting tears. "Midnight, behind the church. I'll bring documentation. You bring the courage to use it." She disappeared into the shadows before they could respond, leaving them standing in the street with more questions than answers. The days that followed fell into a rhythm of careful investigation and growing danger. Ben and Maggie worked through the list Tommy had provided, visiting families one by one, documenting losses and gathering testimonies. Some people refused to talk, too frightened of retribution. Others, like Martha Dawson and Frank Miller, had reached the point where anger outweighed fear. Each evening, they returned to the ranch and compiled their findings. Maggie had a gift for organizing information, for seeing patterns in what seemed like random acts of violence. Ben contributed his surveying knowledge, mapping properties Morrison had acquired and showing how they formed a perfect corridor for the planned railroad route. Tommy came by daily, ostensibly for surveying lessons, but really to share what he had overheard in Wade's office. The boy was taking enormous risks, and Ben knew it. But Tommy seemed to grow more confident with each passing day, as if finally having a purpose beyond disappointing his father had given him something to stand on. "My father's getting nervous," Tommy reported one evening. "I heard him tell Morrison that people are talking more, that the widow's presence is stirring up old resentments." "Is Morrison worried?" Maggie asked. "Not worried, angry. He said Wade needed to handle the situation before Foster arrives." "Handle it how?" "He didn't say specifically, but my father asked if that meant the same as they did with Hayes. Morrison said yes." The words hung heavy in the air. Ben saw Maggie go pale, saw her hand unconsciously move to where she kept Daniel's final note tucked in her bodice. "They're planning to kill us," she said flatly. "They're planning to treat." Ben's voice was calm, but his hand rested on the rifle that now lived within easy reach. "Which means we need to move faster. We need to get to Rose's information tonight and figure out how to access Wade's evidence room." Midnight found them riding toward town under a quarter moon, the darkness thick enough to hide in, but thin enough to navigate by. Ben had wanted Maggie to stay at the ranch, but she had refused with a stubbornness he was learning to recognize. "Where you go, I go," she had said. "We're in this together." So they rode together, two figures moving through shadows toward a meeting that could change everything or damn them both. The church sat at the edge of Coyote Ridge, a simple wooden structure that served multiple denominations and asked no questions about the sins its congregants brought through the door. Behind it, Rose waited, wrapped in a dark shawl, a leather-bound journal clutched to her chest. "You came." Relief flooded her voice. "You asked us to." Ben dismounted, helped Maggie down. "What have you got?" Rose handed over the journal. Even in the dim light, Ben could see how worn it was, how many times it had been opened and written in and carried like a precious burden. 8 years, Rose said quietly. 8 years of writing down everything I heard at the Dusty Spur. Morrison and Wade meet there every month. They think the noise and the whiskey make people careless. They think a saloon girl isn't worth being careful around. Maggie opened the journal, tilted it toward the moonlight. Page after page of careful handwriting, dates and names and amounts. A ledger of corruption laid out in meticulous detail. This is incredible, Maggie breathed. This is evidence of everything. Bribes, threats, murders. I wanted to go to the law, Rose said. But Wade is the law. I wanted to run, but running felt like letting them win. So I wrote, I documented, I waited for someone brave enough to use it. Tell us what happened to your family, Ben said gently. Not just what's in the journal, the whole story. Rose's voice shook, but she told it. How she had been Grace Elizabeth Sullivan, once a schoolteacher married to a farmer named John Sullivan. How they had a daughter, Amy, 8 years old and bright as summer sunshine. How Morrison wanted their land right in the path of his planned railroad route. How Sheriff Wade, still honest then, had refused Morrison's bribes and stood up for the Sullivan family. How Morrison had discovered Wade's dead wife's medical debts, threatened him with debtor's prison, blackmailed him into compliance. How Wade's first act as Morrison's puppet had been to set fire to the Sullivan farmhouse in the middle of the night. My husband died in that fire, Rose said, tears streaming now. I heard Amy screaming. Wade pulled me out, left her inside, said she was already gone. But I heard her. I heard my baby burning. Maggie made a sound like a wounded animal reaching out to grip Rose's hand. Wade became what he is because Morrison broke him, Rose continued. But that doesn't excuse what he did, doesn't bring back my family, doesn't give me back the 8 years I've spent pretending to be someone else just to survive in this town. Why stay, Ben asked, if every day here reminds you of what you lost? Because leaving felt like running, and I'd rather die standing than live running. Rose straightened, wiping her eyes. Besides, where would I go? I have no money, no family, no respectable skills anymore. This is all I have. She gestured to the journal. All I have is the truth written down and witnessed. Use it. Make Morrison pay. Make Wade remember what he was before he became what he is. Ben took the journal carefully, understanding its weight went far beyond the physical. We'll use it. I promise you that. There's more. Rose pulled a folded paper from her pocket. This came today. A letter from Morrison to Wade delivered to the Dusty Spur by mistake. Henry gave it to me, thinking I might know where Wade was. I read it before passing it along. Ben unfolded the letter, angled it toward the moonlight. The words made his blood run cold. Mrs. Hayes and Cartwright are becoming problematic. Suggest permanent solutions before Foster's arrival. Will provide necessary funds. Ensure it looks accidental. The letter was signed with Morrison's distinctive scrawl and dated 2 days ago. They're coming for us, Maggie whispered. Yes, but now we know it. We can prepare. How do you prepare for murder? Same way you prepare for anything, carefully and with help. The partnership between Ben and Maggie had deepened over the days of investigation built on shared purpose and mutual respect. But that night, riding back to the ranch with Rose's journal and Morrison's death warrant tucked in Ben's saddlebag, something shifted between them. Maggie rode close enough that their legs occasionally touched. Her hand found his arm when they crossed a rough section of trail. And when they finally reached the ranch, she didn't immediately go to her room. Instead, she stood with him in the main room, neither willing to end the conversation, neither wanting to be alone. I'm scared, Maggie admitted. I've been scared since Daniel died, but tonight it feels different, more real. Fear is rational. We're up against powerful men who've already proven they'll kill to protect their secrets. Then why are we doing this? Because fear is rational, but so is courage. So is standing up when every instinct says to run. Your husband did it. He could have signed Morrison's papers, taken the money, looked the other way. He chose truth instead. That's worth honoring. Maggie looked at him in the lamplight, this man who had given her shelter when no one else would, who had believed her when belief was dangerous, who stood with her against forces that should have crushed them both. Daniel would have liked you, she said softly. You're like him. stubborn about doing the right thing, even when it costs you. I spent too many years doing the wrong thing, watching atrocities at Shiloh and telling myself it wasn't my responsibility to stop them, surveying for Morrison and telling myself I wasn't accountable for how he used my work. I'm done with that version of myself. You've changed. I'm trying to. My brother told me to build something good. Took me 20 years to understand that building sometimes means tearing down what's rotten first. They stood close in the quiet house, the weight of shared danger and shared purpose pulling them together. Maggie reached up, touched the scar on Ben's jaw where a cavalry saber had caught him years ago. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for believing me, for helping me, for standing with me. I'm not going anywhere." She kissed him, then gentle, and seeking a question as much as a statement. Ben responded carefully, aware that grief and fear and gratitude could tangle themselves into things that looked like love but weren't. But as the kiss deepened, as Maggie pressed closer and he wrapped his arms around her, it felt less like desperation and more like recognition. Two people who had both lost too much, both carried too much guilt, both spent too long alone, finding each other in the darkness, finding something worth fighting for beyond just justice or revenge. They pulled apart slowly. Maggie rested her forehead against his chest, breathing hard. "I'm not ready to forget Daniel," she said. "I don't know if I ever will be. I'm not asking you to forget him. I'm asking if maybe when this is over, there might be room for something new, something that honors what you had while still moving forward." "I'd like that." But before they could say more, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the moment. Fast, urgent, coming hard toward the ranch. Ben grabbed his rifle, moved to the window. A single rider pushing his horse to its limits. Tommy Wade burst through the door without knocking, face pale with terror. "They took Rose, my father, and 3 of Morrison's men. They grabbed her an hour ago. I heard them talking. They're holding her at the old cave system north of town. Said if you don't leave Coyote Ridge by tomorrow's stage, they'll kill her." Ben and Maggie exchanged looks, the warmth of moments before Flash frozen into cold tactical assessment. "How many men?" Ben's voice shifted into the clipped tones of a cavalry officer planning an engagement. "4 that I saw, maybe more. The caves, I surveyed them 2 years ago. Multiple entrances, easy to defend, hard to assault. They chose well. We have to help her." Maggie was already moving toward her room. "Rose risked everything for us." "I know, and we will, but we do it smart." Ben turned to Tommy. "Your father, where does he stand in this?" "He's with them, gave the orders himself. But he's your father. He stopped being my father when he started working for Morrison. Now he's just a corrupt lawman who happens to share my blood." Ben studied the boy, saw the pain beneath the anger, the grief of losing a parent to something worse than death. He thought about Robert dying at Shiloh and begging Ben to be better than what the war had made him. Different circumstances, same essential loss. "All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get Rose back. But Tommy, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If it comes to a choice between your father's life and ours, you don't make that choice. You let me handle it. I won't put you in a position where you have to choose between blood and right." Tommy's eyes shone with tears. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to be dangerous. People might die tonight. Maybe all of us. Then we die doing the right thing. That's better than living with Morrison's boot on our necks." They planned through the small hours of morning, Ben sketching the cave system from memory marking entrances and bottlenecks in places where ambushes could hide. His cavalry training surfaced tactics he thought he had left behind at Shiloh, coming back with uncomfortable ease. "There are 3 main entrances," he explained, drawing quick diagrams. "The largest is here where they'll expect us to come, but there's a ventilation shaft on the eastern side, barely big enough for a person, but navigable if you know it's there. I surveyed it for Morrison, thought he wanted to know about alternate access for mining purposes. We go in through the ventilation shaft." Maggie studied the rough map. "You and I do. Tommy stays outside, creates a distraction at the main entrance, draws the guards toward him while we come in from the side. That puts Tommy in danger. Everything about this puts us in danger. But Tommy's young fast, knows the terrain. He can get away if things go wrong. And if they don't, then we get Rose and get out before Wade realizes what hit him." They rode north as false dawn painted the sky gray, 3 people on a mission that could save a life or end all of theirs. Ben carried his Winchester rifle and the cavalry pistol he had kept from the war. Maggie had a small Derringer tucked in her bodice, a weapon she had revealed only when they were planning the rescue. Tommy was unarmed by mutual agreement, too young for the kind of violence this might require. The caves appeared as dark mouths in the hillside remnants of ancient mining operations, abandoned when the veins played out. Ben circled wide, approaching from the east where scrub brush provided cover. The ventilation shaft was exactly where he remembered it, a narrow vertical passage that opened into the cave system below. This is it. Ben secured a rope around a boulder, tested it with his weight. Maggie, you go first. Move slow and quiet. When you reach the bottom, wait for me. Ben, she gripped his arm, if we don't make it out, we're making it out. But if we don't, I want you to know that these days at your ranch have been the first time I've felt alive since Daniel died. Thank you for that. He kissed her quickly. Tell me after we rescue Rose. It'll mean more then. Maggie descended into darkness, the rope creaking softly. Ben watched her disappear, counted to 30, then followed. The shaft was tight, claustrophobic, the stone walls pressing close. He thought about Daniel Hayes dying in the Silver Creek collapse, trapped in the dark, knowing he had been betrayed. The same company that killed Daniel and now held Rose. The same corruption that murdered 14 miners was about to claim another victim. Unless Ben and Maggie stopped it. He reached the bottom and found Maggie waiting, eyes already adjusting to the dim light that filtered from deeper in the cave. Voices echoed from ahead, men playing cards to pass the time while they waited for their hostage's fate to be decided. Ben moved forward silently, Maggie following both of them, ghosts in the darkness. The cave widened into a larger chamber. Torchlight flickered against rough stone walls. 3 men sat around a makeshift table, cards dealt, whiskey passing between them. In the corner, tied to a support post, Rose Chambers sat with her head down, dress torn, face bruised. But alive. Still alive. Ben assessed the tactical situation with practiced eyes. 3 armed men alert but not expecting trouble from this direction. Rose approximately 20 feet from the nearest guard. Multiple exit points if things went wrong. It could work. It had to work. He signaled Maggie to stay back, crept closer, but before he could make his move, Rose's head came up. She saw him in the shadows, her eyes going wide. One of the guards noticed her reaction, started to turn. Ben had no choice. He stepped into the light, rifle raised. Hands up, all of you. Do it now. The men froze for a heartbeat. Then chaos erupted. The nearest guard went for his gun. Ben fired the report, deafening in the enclosed space, aiming for the shoulder, wounding, not killing. The man went down screaming. The second guard rushed Ben too close for the rifle to be useful. They grappled, falling into the card table, cards and coins scattering. Ben's cavalry training kicked in, muscle memory from Shiloh taking over. Elbow to the throat, knee to the gut, twist and throw. The guard hit the floor hard and stayed down. The third guard grabbed Rose's knife, appearing at her throat. Back off or she dies. Ben raised his hands, rifle pointed at the ceiling. Easy. Nobody needs to die here. Tell that to your friend bleeding on the floor. He'll live. We can all walk away from this. Not happening. You're going to put down that rifle or I'm going to cut this whore's throat. The word hit Ben like a physical blow. He saw Rose flinch, saw the shame and anger and fear cross her face. And he saw red. But before he could move, a new voice rang through the cave. Let her go. Tommy Wade stood at the main entrance, a pistol in his trembling hands pointed at the guard holding Rose. The guard laughed. The sheriff's boy. What are you going to do, kids, shoot me? If I have to. Your daddy know you're here. I don't care what my daddy knows. The guard shifted, trying to keep both Ben and Tommy in view. It was the opening Ben needed. He lunged forward, using the rifle butt as a club, catching the guard across the temple. The man dropped, knife clattering away. Rose scrambled free, running to Maggie's waiting arms. Ben checked the downed guards. 2 unconscious, 1 wounded but stable. They would live, though they might wish otherwise, when Wade found out they had been bested by a surveyor, a widow, and a 16-year-old boy. Everyone out, Ben ordered. Now, before Wade realizes something's wrong. They fled into the pre-dawn darkness, Rose between Maggie and Tommy, Ben covering their retreat. The horses were where they had left them, patient and waiting. They mounted and rode hard for the ranch, putting distance between themselves and the consequences of what they had just done. Only when they were safely behind closed doors, Rose tended, and everyone accounted for, did Ben let himself think about what came next. They had rescued Rose, but at a cost. Wade now knew they were willing to fight back. Morrison would escalate. The careful investigation, the methodical building of evidence that was over. This was open warfare now. Rose sat at the table, cleaned up and bandaged, holding a cup of comedy and shaking hands. They have my journal. The guards took it when they grabbed me. 8 years of documentation. Gone. The words fell like stones. Maggie went pale. Tommy swore. Ben felt something crack inside him. All our evidence, Maggie whispered. Rose's journal, the testimony we've gathered. We have nothing but our word, and Morrison's lawyers will destroy us in court. Ben walked to the window, stared out at the land he had built with honest labor, the life he had constructed from the ruins of his past. Robert's compass sat on the sill needle, pointing true north, unwavering, even when everything else fell apart. Build something good, his brother had said. But what do you build when the foundation keeps getting torn away? He turned back to face the room. 3 people looking at him for answers he didn't have. Tommy, who had betrayed his father for justice. Rose, who had lost everything twice and still kept fighting. Maggie, who had walked into hell for truth and found more courage than most soldiers he had known. They were what he had built, not structures or surveys or carefully documented evidence. People, a alliance forged in fire, a family chosen instead of inherited. We still have time, Ben said quietly. 20 days until Foster arrives. We can rebuild the case. How? Rose's voice was flat with defeat. The journal took me 8 years to compile. Then we compile what we can in 20 days. We have testimony. We have the water sample from the Dawson farm. We have Frank Miller's statement about the tools he made. We have Tommy's firsthand knowledge of conversations between Wade and Morrison. It's not enough, or we die trying. Maggie stood, walked to his side, took his hand. Together. Together. Rose looked between them, seeing something there that made her smile despite everything. Your husband was a good man, Mrs. Hayes, but I think you found another one. I think maybe I have. Outside, dawn broke fully over Wyoming territory. Somewhere in Coyote Ridge, Wade was discovering his guards had failed. Somewhere in his office, Morrison was calculating his next move. And somewhere, justice waited patiently for those brave enough to call it forth. 20 days remained. 20 days to build a case from ashes and hope and stubborn refusal to surrender. 20 days to prove that truth could stand against power, that courage could outlast corruption. 20 days to make 14 dead miners and 1 murdered engineer and 1 burned child means something beyond just more victims of greed. Ben Cartwright looked at the people in his house, the alliance he had built without really meaning to, and felt something settle in his chest. Not peace exactly, but purpose. The kind of purpose Robert had told him to find, the kind that justified waking up each morning and trying again. They had lost the evidence, but they hadn't lost themselves. And sometimes that was enough to build on. The war had truly begun. The days after Rose's rescue passed in tense preparation. 18 days remained until Judge Ernest Foster's arrival, and every hour felt like sand slipping through fingers. Ben's ranch had become a fortress of sorts. Windows watched, rifles loaded, doors barred at night. They were expecting retaliation, but Wade stayed curiously quiet. Too quiet. It's a trap, Tommy said on the 3rd day, arriving with news from town. My father's waiting for you to make a mistake. Morrison told him to be patient, that desperate people always slip up. Then we don't slip. Ben spread the recovered documents across the table, what little evidence they had managed to salvage and rebuild. Martha Dawson's water sample, Frank Miller's statement about the tools, Rose's testimony, though, without her journal to back it up, Daniel Hayes's final note with its incomplete warning. We work smarter. Maggie looked up from the list she was compiling. We still need the original ledgers. Without them, it's our word against Morrison's lawyers, and Morrison's lawyers will bury us. The ledgers are in Morrison's safe, Ben said, at the Silver Creek mine office. I saw it when I worked for him, big Remington safe behind a painting. He keeps his most sensitive documents there. How do we get to them? We break in 2 nights from now when the moon is dark. Rose set down her coffee cup with a sharp click. That's suicide. The mine has guards 24 hours a day. I know. I surveyed the entire operation. I know the guard rotations, the weak points, the access tunnels. Ben pulled out a sketch he had been working on. This ventilation shaft connects to the office level. Same principle as the caves, just deeper and more dangerous. Dangerous how? Tommy leaned over the map. 200-foot descent. Narrow passages. If we're caught inside, there's no escape route. Then we don't get caught. Maggie's voice carried a determination that reminded Ben of soldiers before battle, that moment when fear transforms into resolve. They planned with military precision, Ben drawing on cavalry tactics and surveying knowledge to map every detail. Tommy would create a distraction at the main gate, drawing guards away. Ben and Maggie would enter through the ventilation shaft, crack the safe, retrieve the ledgers, and exit before anyone realized they had been there. It was a terrible plan with a dozen ways to fail, but it was the only plan they had. The night chosen was moonless and cold, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound and turned familiar landscapes strange. Ben and Maggie approached the Silver Creek mine from the east, moving through scrub brush like ghosts. Tommy had ridden ahead hours earlier, positioning himself to begin his distraction at precisely 2 in the morning. The mine rose against the stars, a skeleton of wood and iron that had swallowed 14 men and countless tons of earth. Ben felt Daniel Hayes's presence here, imagined the engineer's last moments as the supports failed and the ceiling came down. This was where Maggie's husband had died. This was where Morrison's corruption had become murder. "You all right?" Ben whispered. Maggie nodded, but her hands trembled as she gripped the rope. Daniel died down there, in the dark, knowing he had been betrayed. Then we make sure his death means something. We get the proof, we finish what he started. They found the ventilation shaft exactly where Ben remembered it, a dark mouth in the hillside disguised by brush and time. He secured the rope, tested it against his weight, then looked at Maggie one more time. Last chance to stay topside. Not happening. Where you go, I go. She descended first, disappearing into darkness. Ben counted to 30, listening for any sound that might indicate discovery, then followed. The shaft was tighter than the cave had been, walls pressing close, the smell of earth and old minerals thick in his throat. He thought about cave-ins and structural failures and all the ways this could end badly. Then he thought about Robert's compass in his pocket, about the promise he had made to build something good, and kept descending. The shaft opened into a horizontal tunnel barely tall enough to crawl through. Maggie waited there, her face pale in the dim light filtering from deeper in the mine. Ben could see the fear in her eyes, the way confined spaces made her breath come short. This was where her husband had died, crushed by earth and betrayal. "Breathe," Ben whispered, taking her hand. "I measured this shaft myself, 40 feet more, then it opens into the office level. Daniel died in the dark like this. But you won't. I promise you that." They crawled forward, knees scraping stone shoulders, brushing walls, every sound magnified in the enclosed space. Ben heard Maggie's breathing grow ragged, felt her hand tighten on his when the tunnel narrowed further. But she didn't stop, didn't turn back, just kept moving forward with the same stubborn courage that had made her walk into the dusty spur and say, "That's perfect." The tunnel finally widened into a vertical shaft leading up. Ben could see lamplight above, hear voices echoing from the office level, guards patrolling, boots heavy on wooden floors. He checked his pocket watch. 1:58, 2 minutes until Tommy's distraction. They waited in silence, pressed against the stone-counting heartbeats. Then precisely at 2, an explosion of sound from outside. Shouting, gunfire, the thunder of horses. "What the hell?" A guard's voice from above. "Check it out, everyone to the main gate." Boots pounded away. Ben waited 10 more seconds, making sure, then climbed. He emerged into Morrison's office, helped Maggie up behind him. The room was exactly as he remembered. Expensive furnishings, maps of railroad routes, covering one wall, and behind a painting of some European landscape, the Remington safe. Ben removed the painting, carefully set it aside. The safe was a beauty, precision engineering designed to resist everything except knowledge and patience. He pulled out his surveying tools, the same instruments he used to measure land, now repurposed for cracking locks. "Can you actually open it?" Maggie kept watch at the door. "Surveying is about precision. Safes are about precision. The principles are the same." Ben pressed his ear to the cool metal, listening as he turned the dial. Just need to feel the tumbler's catch. It took 15 minutes of concentrated work, every second stretching like hours. Outside, Tommy's distraction continued keeping the guards occupied. Ben worked methodically, ignoring the sweat on his palms, the voice in his head that said they were going to get caught, the memories of Shiloh that surfaced whenever adrenaline ran high. The final tumbler clicked. The safe door swung open. Inside lay Morrison's secrets, ledgers documenting 8 years of bribes, threats, and payments, contracts with forged signatures including multiple documents bearing Ben's name, letters ordering specific acts of violence, and one folder marked Silver Creek that made Ben's blood run cold. He pulled it out, opened it. Inside were the original structural reports, the ones Daniel Hayes had filed, warning that the mine was unsafe, stamped across them in red ink, ignored. And beneath that in Morrison's handwriting, eliminate Hayes, make it look accidental. Maggie saw it over his shoulder, her breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a sob. That's Daniel's handwriting, his report, his warning. He tried to save them, all 14 men, and Morrison killed him for it. We have proof now, real documented proof. Ben gathered everything quickly, stuffing papers into the satchel he had brought. 8 years of corruption condensed into 10 pounds of evidence. Outside, the sounds of confusion were dying down. Tommy's distraction wouldn't last much longer. Time to go. They had just reached the shaft when the office door burst open. Sheriff Clayton Wade stood there, gun drawn, face twisted with rage, and something that might have been pain. Behind him, 3 deputies blocked any escape through the main corridor. Should have known you'd try something stupid, Cartwright. Ben's hand moved toward his pistol, but Wade's gun was already leveled. Don't. I'll drop you before you clear leather. Let Maggie go. This is between us. Nothing's between just us anymore. Morrison wants you both dead, and I'm tired of disappointing Morrison. But Wade's gun hand wavered just slightly. Ben saw the conflict in the sheriff's eyes. This was a man who had been good once before. Desperation and blackmail twisted him into something else. You don't have to do this, Wade. You can still choose differently. Choose what prison disgrace. I'm too deep in this. There's no way out for me. There's always a way out. Judge Foster can grant you immunity in exchange for testimony against Morrison. You walk away, start over, leave this behind, and live with what I've done. Live knowing I let a little girl burn. The words hung in the air. Tommy had told them about Amy Sullivan, about Rose's daughter dying in the fire Wade set. This was the wound that wouldn't heal the sin that ate at Wade every day. You can't change the past, Ben said carefully. None of us can, but you can stop adding to it. You can make sure no one else dies like Amy did. It's too late. It's never too late. My brother told me that at Shiloh right before he died. He'd done terrible things in the war, things that haunted him. But his last act was trying to make me better, trying to stop the cycle. You can do that too. Wade's gun lowered slightly. The deputies behind him shifted uncertain. Whatever they had been told to do here, this wasn't it. Then Tommy appeared behind the deputies, no weapon, just a 16-year-old boy facing down armed men. Father, please, don't do this. Wade's face crumpled. Tommy, you shouldn't be here. Where else would I be? You're my father, and these are good people trying to stop a bad man. I'm the bad man's son. I'm the one who burned the Sullivan farm, who poisoned wells and killed livestock, and helped Morrison murder anyone who got in his way. I'm the monster here. You became a monster, but you weren't always one. I remember when people respected you, when you wore that badge with honor. That man is still in there somewhere. Wade looked at his son, at the hope and pain in the boy's eyes, and something broke. The gun dropped to his side. His shoulders sagged. I'm sorry. God, Tommy, I'm so sorry. Then help us. Help Mr. Cartwright and Mrs. Hayes stop Morris. Right thing. Wade looked at the satchel of evidence at Ben and Maggie, at the choice lay before him. Redemption or damnation. Truth or continued lies. The man he had been or the monster he had become. All right, he said finally. All right, I'll testify. But Foster has to guarantee immunity. I won't go to prison for following Morrison's orders. He'll guarantee it, Ben said, if your testimony can put Morrison away. It can. I've kept records of my own. Insurance in case Morrison ever tried to betray me. Every order he gave, every payment he made, every crime he directed, it's all documented. Where? My office, hidden in a false drawer in my desk. Ben extended his hand. After a moment, Wade took it. The handshake was brief, formal, sealing a bargain between enemies who might become something else. They left the mine together, an unlikely alliance forged in darkness and desperation. Tommy rode beside his father, saying nothing but present. The silence between them was heavy with years of disappointment and the fragile hope of repair. Back at the ranch, Wade handed over his records. Combined with Morrison's ledgers, Rose's testimony, and the physical evidence they had gathered, it created an overwhelming case. 8 years of corruption laid bare every crime documented, every victim named. "This is enough," Maggie said, spreading the evidence across the table. "This is more than enough." "If Foster is as honest as you say," Wade added, "Morrison won't be able to buy his way out. Not with this much proof." Ben looked at the sheriff, this man who had threatened them and terrorized the town, but now sat in his kitchen helping build a case against his former master. Redemption was a strange thing, messy and complicated, and never as clean as stories made it seem. Wade would never be forgiven for what he had done. The weight of Amy Sullivan's death would follow him forever. But maybe, just maybe, he could stop adding to the pile of sins. 12 days until Foster arrives, Ben said. We use that time to prepare our testimony. Make sure every witness is ready, every piece of evidence properly documented. When Foster opens that courtroom, we bury Morrison so deep his lawyers can't dig him out. They work through the remaining days with focused intensity, preparing for what would be the most important trial Coyote Ridge had ever seen. Ben drilled the witnesses, making sure their testimonies were clear and consistent. Maggie organized the documentary evidence, creating a timeline that showed Morrison's pattern of fraud and violence stretching back 8 years. Tommy helped his father prepare his testimony, the two of them slowly, painfully beginning to rebuild something that might eventually become trust. Rose was the hardest. She refused to be in the same room with Wade, the man who had killed her family. But she agreed to testify, agreed to face Morrison in court and speak her truth. For Amy, for John, for the 8 years she had spent as someone else just to survive. Judge Ernest Foster arrived on schedule, a man of 62, with white hair and eyes that had seen too much frontier justice to be easily fooled. He was a circuit judge traveling between territories known for fairness and an intolerance for corruption. Ben had met him once years ago when Foster had presided over a land dispute. The judge had a reputation for cutting through legal nonsense and getting to the truth, which made him exactly what they needed. The preliminary hearing was set for the town hall, the only building large enough to hold everyone who wanted to witness this confrontation. On the morning of the trial, Ben dressed in his best clothes, checked his rifle one last time, and walked to the hall with Maggie beside him. The room was packed. Townspeople filled every seat, lined the walls, crowded the doorway. Some came hoping for justice. Others came for spectacle. All of them wanted to see what happened when power was finally challenged. Victor Morrison sat at the defendant's table with 2 expensive lawyers from Denver, men in fine suits who carried themselves with the arrogance of those who believed money could solve any problem. Morrison himself looked calm, almost amused, as if this entire proceeding was beneath him. Wade sat apart under guard, but not shackled, the prosecution's star witness. He stared straight ahead, not looking at anyone, his face carved from stone. Ben, Maggie, Rose, and Tommy took seats near the front. Frank Miller and Martha Dawson sat with other victims, a dozen families whose lives Morrison had destroyed. The air was thick with tension and the weight of accumulated grievances. Judge Foster called the court to order, his voice carrying authority earned through decades of separating truth from lies. This hearing concerns allegations of fraud, conspiracy, intimidation, and murder against Victor Morrison. The territory has presented substantial evidence. Mr. Morrison, how do you plead? Morrison stood smoothing his expensive suit. Not guilty, Your Honor. These allegations are fabrications by disgruntled former employees and jealous competitors. We'll see about that. Prosecution, call your first witness. Ben had insisted on a specific order for the witnesses. Start with the victims, establish the pattern, then bring in the technical evidence. Finally finish with Wade's bombshell testimony. Martha Dawson took the stand first. She told of the poisoned well, the dead livestock, the forced sale of land for a fraction of its value. She produced the water sample Ben had taken, which had been tested by a chemist in the nearest large town, and found to contain arsenic in concentrations that could only be deliberate. Morrison's lawyers tried to argue coincidence, natural contamination. But Ben had prepared for that. He took the stand, next explained in technical detail how arsenic deposits work, how natural contamination would present differently, how the specific concentration in the Dawson well matched commercial poison available in any general store. "I'm a surveyor," Ben said. "I measure things for a living, and these measurements don't lie. Someone poisoned that well deliberately." "Can you prove it was Mr. Morrison?" the lawyer challenged. "Not directly, but I can show that the Dawson farm sits directly in the path of Morrison's planned railroad route. And I can show that every other family forced to sell land sits along that same route. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern." He presented his maps, the surveying work that showed Morrison's systematic acquisition of land forming a perfect corridor for the railroad. The evidence was mathematical, undeniable, the kind of truth that couldn't be argued away. Frank Miller testified next, explaining the tools he had made at Morrison's request. Tools designed to sabotage mines and poison livestock. He showed the maker's marks he had put on each piece. "Morrison's lawyers found one of those tools at the Dawson farm," Frank said, "claimed it proved nothing. But I can prove I made it, and I can prove Morrison paid me to make it." He produced receipts, invoices, detailed descriptions of each commission. The lawyers tried to discredit him, suggesting he was lying to avoid prosecution himself. But Frank stood firm. "I did wrong making those tools. I know that, and I'll answer for it. But I'm done lying to protect rich men who use my work to hurt innocents." Rose took the stand mid-afternoon and the courtroom went silent. Everyone in Coyote Ridge knew her story, or thought they did. The woman who worked at the dusty spur wearing paint and false smiles. But today she wore a simple gray dress, her hair pinned, neat, her face free of cosmetics. She looked like what she had been before Morrison destroyed her life. A school teacher, a mother, a woman of dignity. "State your name for the record," Foster said gently. "Grace Elizabeth Sullivan, though I've gone by Rose Chambers for 8 years." "Why did you change your name?" "Because Grace Sullivan died the night Victor Morrison had my family killed. I became someone else to survive." She told the story without tears, without drama, just flat recitation of facts. The land Morrison wanted, Wade's initial refusal to help, the blackmail, the fire, her husband burning, her daughter screaming. "Sheriff Wade pulled me from the flames. He left my 8-year-old daughter inside. He said she was already gone. But I heard her. I heard Amy calling for me while she burned." Morrison's lawyers objected, called it hearsay and emotional manipulation. But Foster overruled them. "The witnesses establishing motive and pattern." Continue, Mrs. Sullivan. "I spent 8 years at the Dusty Spur listening to Morrison and Wade plan crimes. I wrote it all down. Every conversation, every deal, every payment. I documented 8 years of corruption. Where is this documentation now? Sheriff Wade's men took it when they kidnapped me. But I remember. I remember all of it." She recited dates, amounts, specific conversations. Her memory was extraordinary, each detail precise. The lawyers tried to shake her, suggesting her memory was faulty or she was lying for revenge. But Rose had spent 8 years living with this information, turning it over in her mind, keeping it fresh through sheer force of will. "I couldn't save my family," she said finally, "but maybe I can save someone else's." Then came Maggie's testimony. She took the stand with Daniel's final note in her hand, that blood-stained scrap of paper with its incomplete warning. "My husband was a good man, an honest engineer. He discovered that the Silver Creek mine was structurally unsafe. He filed reports warning of the danger. Morrison ignored those warnings. 3 weeks later, my husband died when the mine collapsed." She produced Daniel's note, the official reports. He had filed the response from Morrison's office, stamping them ignored. The evidence trail was clear. Daniel had done everything right, followed every protocol, raised every alarm, and Morrison had killed him for it. 14 men died in that collapse. Maggie said, her voice shaking but steady. 14 husbands and fathers and sons, all because Morrison cut corners and silenced anyone who objected. "My husband died defending truth. I'm here to finish what he started." Morrison's lawyers tried to argue that mine collapses were common, that Daniel's reports were alarmist, that there was no direct evidence linking Morrison to any deliberate action. But Maggie had prepared for this. "I have Morrison's ledgers," she said quietly, "taken from his own safe, including a folder marked Silver Creek with the order to eliminate my husband, written in Morrison's own hand." She produced the document. The courtroom erupted. Foster demanded silence, examined the paper himself. His expression grew darker with each word he read. "This appears to be a direct order for murder." "It is," Maggie confirmed. "Morrison killed my husband, and he would have killed me too if Mr. Cartwright hadn't protected me." The testimony continued through the afternoon. Witness after witness, victim after victim, each adding another piece to the overwhelming case against Morrison. By the time the sun began to set, the pattern was undeniable. Morrison had used Wade to terrorize anyone who stood in his way, had systematically acquired land through intimidation and violence, had murdered at least 15 people, and destroyed dozens of families. But the defense still had one argument. All of this was circumstantial. Yes, Morrison benefited from the crimes. Yes, he owned the land where the crimes occurred. But where was the direct evidence linking him to the orders? Where was the proof that he personally had directed Wade to commit these acts? That's when Foster called Clayton Wade to the stand. The courtroom held its breath as Wade walked forward, took his seat, placed his hand on the Bible. This was the man who had enforced Morrison's will for 8 years. The corrupt sheriff who had burned homes and poisoned wells and helped commit murder. Everyone in that room had a reason to hate Clayton Wade, but they needed him. Without his testimony, Morrison might walk free. "Sheriff Wade," Foster began, "you have been granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for truthful testimony. Do you understand the terms, 'I do your honor'? Then tell this court what you know about Victor Morrison's activities." Wade took a breath, then began. He spoke in a flat, emotionless voice, listing crimes like a clerk reading inventory. Every act of violence, every intimidation, every murder. He provided dates, amounts, specific orders from Morrison. He explained how the system worked, how Morrison would identify land he wanted, how Wade would make life impossible for the owners until they sold for nothing. "The Sullivan fire," Wade said. "Morrison ordered it personally. Told me to make sure the whole family was gone, no witnesses. I set the fire. I pulled Grace Sullivan out. I left her daughter to burn because Morrison said there couldn't be any survivors who might talk." His voice cracked on the last word. In the audience, Rose sat rigid, tears streaming silently down her face. "The Dawson well, Morrison gave me poison and told me where to pour it. The Silver Creek collapse. Morrison knew the mine was unsafe. Knew Daniel Hayes had filed warnings. He ordered me to arrange an accident. I paid men to sabotage the supports." On and on, crime after crime, each one documented in the ledgers Wade had kept as insurance. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, devastating. Morrison's lawyers tried to argue that Wade was lying to save himself, that a corrupt sheriff's testimony couldn't be trusted. But Wade had documentation to support every claim. Receipts, letters, records that matched perfectly with the evidence seized from Morrison's safe. Foster called a brief recess. When court reconvened, his face was grim. "I've reviewed the evidence. The testimony is corroborated by multiple witnesses and substantial documentation. Mr. Morrison, I'm prepared to issue a preliminary ruling." That's when Morrison moved. He had been sitting quietly through hours of testimony, his lawyers whispering reassurances, his face calm. But now, as Foster prepared to speak, Morrison stood suddenly. His hand went to his coat. "You think this ends it?" Morrison's voice rang out. "You think your little frontier court can touch me? I have money. I have connections. I'll bury every one of you." He pulled out a small derringer, the kind of weapon gentlemen carried for emergencies, aimed it across the courtroom at Wade. "You traitorous bastard, after everything I did for you." Time slowed. Ben saw the gun, saw Morrison's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Wade frozen in the witness box. He moved without thinking, cavalry reflexes taking over. Dove across the space between them, hitting Wade's shoulder just as Morrison fired. The bullet meant for Wade's chest caught Ben instead, punching through his upper arm in a white flash of pain. He and Wade went down in a tangle, crashing into the witness box. Behind them, the marshal and 3 deputies swarmed Morrison, wrestling him down, the derringer clattering away. Chaos erupted, people screaming, chairs overturning, everyone surging forward or back. Maggie's voice rose above the din, screaming Ben's name. Then she was there, pressing her hand against the wound, her face pale with terror. "Ben, Ben, look at me. You're all right. You're going to be all right. Is Wade alive? Ben's voice came out rough. I'm here. Wade crawled from beneath him, breathing hard, eyes wide with shock. You took the bullet. You saved me. Couldn't let Morrison kill you. Tommy needs his father. The town doctor pushed through the crowd, examined Ben's wound with efficient hands. The bullet had gone clean through the meat of his shoulder, missing bone and major blood vessels. Painful as hell, but not life-threatening. You'll live, the doctor pronounced, though you won't be doing any heavy lifting for a while. Foster's gavel crashed down, demanding order. The marshal hauled Morrison to his feet, wrists shackled the derringer in evidence. The wealthy mine owner had lost his composure, entirely screaming threats and accusations as he was dragged toward the door. Add attempted murder in open court to the charges, Foster said coldly. I witnessed it myself. Mr. Morrison, you've just guaranteed your own conviction. Morrison was taken away, still shouting, his expensive lawyers trailing helplessly behind. The trial was effectively over. With Morrison's violent outburst witnessed by a judge and a courtroom full of people, no jury in the territory would acquit him. Foster reconvened the hearing 2 days later for formal sentencing. Ben attended with his arm in a sling, Maggie at his side. The wound ached, but he wouldn't have missed this for anything. Morrison stood before the judge, diminished now, the arrogance burned away by reality. His lawyers had abandoned him once they realized the case was hopeless. He faced Foster alone. Victor Morrison, Foster said, I find you guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. 15 counts of murder in the first degree, fraud, extortion, and attempted murder in open court. The sentence is life imprisonment at the territorial prison. You will be transported there immediately and held without possibility of parole. Morrison said nothing as the marshal led him away. The man who had controlled Coyote Ridge for 8 years left in chains, his empire of corruption crumbling to dust. Then Foster turned to Wade. Sheriff Clayton Wade, per our agreement, you are granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for your testimony. However, you are hereby stripped of your badge and authority. You are permanently exiled from Wyoming territory. If you are found within territorial boundaries after 30 days, you will be arrested and charged with your crimes. Do you understand, Mom? I do, Your Honor. Wade's voice was quiet. Then I suggest you use these 30 days wisely. Make whatever peace you can. And Sheriff, try to be the man your son believes you can be. Wade nodded, unable to speak. He looked at Tommy sitting in the audience, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of it someday. The days after Morrison's conviction felt surreal. Coyote Ridge transformed overnight from a town ruled by fear to a community reclaiming itself. Families whose land had been stolen filed claims with Foster, who ordered Morrison's assets seized and redistributed. The poisoned wells were cleaned. The burned barns were rebuilt. People who had been too frightened to speak suddenly found their voices. Wade spent his remaining days in town quietly. He worked with Foster to ensure all of Morrison's victims received restitution. He formally apologized to Rose, though they both knew words couldn't undo what he had done. And he spent long hours with Tommy trying to explain the choices he had made and why they were wrong. On the day before Wade was set to leave, he came to Ben's ranch. Tommy was there learning advanced surveying techniques, the boy's skill growing daily. Wade watched them work for a moment before speaking. Cartwright, can I have a word? Ben set down his surveying equipment, nodded. They walked a short distance from the house out of Tommy's earshot. I wanted to thank you, Wade said, for taking that bullet, for giving me the chance to make some kind of amends. I didn't do it for you, I did it for Tommy. I know, but I'm grateful anyway. Wade paused, struggling with words. I was a good man once, before Morrison broke me, before I let myself be broken. I want Tommy to remember that version of me, not the monster I became. Then be that man again. Somewhere else away from here. Start over. Do better. I'll try. Wade extended his hand. Ben took it. The handshake was brief, but it marked something. Not friendship, never that, but a kind of closure. Wade turned to walk back to his horse, then stopped. Take care of my son. Teach him to be better than I was. I will. Tommy emerged from the house as his father mounted up. They looked at each other across the distance, years of disappointment and hurt between them, but also a fragile thread of possibility. Goodbye, Tommy. Goodbye, Father. Be safe. Wade nodded once, then rode away. Tommy watched until his father disappeared over the horizon, tears sliding silently down his face. Ben walked over, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. He made terrible choices, but he was trying to do right at the end. I know. Does that make up for what he did? No, but it's something, and sometimes something is all we get. 6 months passed. Coyote Ridge settled into a new normal, its corrupt foundations replaced with honest governance. A new sheriff was elected, a man with no ties to Morrison or the railroad. Rose reopened her school, teaching children reading and arithmetic and the importance of standing up for truth. Frank Miller's blacksmith shop thrived as he refused commissions from anyone asking for questionable work. The Cartwright Ranch grew too. Ben and Maggie married in a small ceremony at the church, Rose and Tommy standing as witnesses. The house was expanded, a second bedroom added for the baby that Maggie carried 7 months along and visibly pregnant. On a cold November morning, Ben worked with Tommy on an advanced surveying problem, teaching the boy to calculate property boundaries using celestial navigation. At 17, Tommy had become an accomplished surveyor in his own right, with an ethical foundation that would serve him well. Mr. Cartwright, Tommy said as they finished the calculations, I've been thinking about the future, about what I want to do. What's that? I want to be a surveyor like you, an honest one, someone who makes sure people get exactly what they're owed, no more, no less. Ben felt warmth spread through his chest. This was what Robert had meant. Legacy wasn't just about buildings or land. It was about values passed down, principles carried forward, the next generation learning from the mistakes of the last. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the brass compass that had guided him for 21 years, Robert's compass, the last gift his brother had given him at Shiloh. Then you'll need this. Tommy's eyes went wide. Mr. Cartwright, I can't. That's your brother's. It's too important. Exactly, which is why I'm giving it to you. My brother told me to build something good. I've tried to do that. Now it's your turn. Ben pressed the compass into Tommy's hand. Use it to find true north. And when you're old enough, when you've learned everything, you can pass it to someone else who needs guidance. That's how legacy works. Not keeping it for yourself, but giving it away to those who come after. Tommy held the compass like it was made of glass, tears streaming freely now. I'll honor it, I promise. I know you will. That afternoon, Ben and Maggie rode out to the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Coyote Ridge. They visited 3 graves, stopping at each. The first marker read Robert Cartwright, 1842 to 1862. He built through others. Ben knelt, placed a hand on the stone. I did it, brother. I built something. A ranch, a family, a community. I fought corruption and stood for truth. I helped Tommy find his path. I think you'd be proud. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of coming winter. Ben chose to believe it was Robert's approval. The second grave, Daniel Hayes, 1853 to 1882. Truth was his legacy. Maggie knelt here, one hand on her swollen belly, the other on the cold stone. Daniel, I miss you every day, but I've found something good. Someone good. Ben helped with me finish what you started. Morrison is in prison because you wouldn't compromise your principles. Your death mattered. It changed everything. She wiped her eyes, smiled through tears. I'm going to have a baby. Ben's baby. If it's a boy, we're naming him Daniel Robert. For both the men who showed us how to stand tall. I hope that's all right. The third grave was smaller, heartbreaking in its simplicity. Amy Sullivan, 1867 to 1875. Innocence, lost, never forgotten. Tommy had come with them, stood now at the child's grave with flowers in his hands. Amy, I never knew you, but Miss Rose tells me stories about how bright you were, how you loved learning. I'm sorry for what my father did. I can't change it, but I promise I'll make sure nothing like that happens again. I'll be a surveyor who tells truth, who protects people instead of hurting them. That's my promise to you. He placed the flowers gently, stood in silence for a long moment. Ben and Maggie joined him, the 3 of them standing together on the hill, surrounded by the graves of those who had sacrificed for the truth they now defended. This is legacy, Ben said quietly, not the land we own or the money we make, but the people we touch, the values we pass on, the choice to build instead of destroy. Maggie took his hand, placed it on her belly where their child moved and kicked. In the future we create. They stood together as the sun set over Wyoming territory, 3 generations connected by choice rather than blood. Ben thought about Robert dying at Shiloh, about Daniel Hayes crushed in a mine collapse, about Amy Sullivan burning in her home. All the people who had died for truth or been destroyed by corruption. Their deaths had meaning now, had changed Coyote Ridge, had torn down Morrison's empire, had given people the courage to stand against injustice. That was legacy. That was what building something good really meant. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Ben Cartwright stood with his wife and his student looking out over the land he had claimed and the community he had helped save. Robert's compass now rested in Tommy's pocket, its needle pointing true, ready to guide another generation toward honest work and righteous purpose. The work wasn't finished. It never would be. Corruption would always exist. People would always need, defending truth would always need champions. But tonight on this hill, surrounded by the evidence of what courage and principle could accomplish, Ben felt something he hadn't experienced since before Shiloh. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the knowledge that he had honored his promises, that he had built something lasting, that when his time came, he would leave behind more than just property and possessions. He would leave behind people who carried forward the lessons he had learned at such terrible cost. That was enough. That was everything. Ben's voice carried soft across the cemetery, speaking to the dead and the living and the unborn child who would inherit this legacy. I am Benjamin Cartwright, surveyor, husband, teacher. I came to Wyoming to escape my past, but I found my future instead. Found people worth fighting for, principles worth defending, a life worth building. My brother told me to create something good. I've done that. And now I pass the work to those who come after, knowing they'll build on what we started, carry forward what we began. He looked at Maggie, at the life growing inside her, at Tommy, young and determined and ready to take up the compass, at the town below, lights beginning to glow in windows as families gathered for evening meals. This is what we built, not just houses and fences and surveyed boundaries, but community, justice, hope, the chance for people to live without fear, to raise children without corruption, to build honest lives on honest ground. That's the legacy. That's what endures. Maggie leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. Tommy stood tall, the compass a weight in his pocket and a purpose in his heart. The three of them connected by battles fought and won, by sacrifices honored and remembered, by the simple choice to stand for something beyond themselves. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, in the spaces between stars, in the silence between heartbeats, Ben felt Robert's presence. His brother who had died too young in a war that should never have been fought, who had given Ben a compass and a command: build something good. Finally, after 21 years of wandering and searching and trying, Ben had fulfilled that promise, had built not just with his hands but with his heart, had created not just structures but meaning, had found not just redemption but purpose. The legacy was real. The work would continue. The compass would point true. And that was enough.